According to Yeshua, there will be a time of great tribulation, immediately followed by the day of the Lord, then his return, his coming on the clouds to the sound of a great shofar and the gathering of the believers. Yet despite the harmony between what Yeshua says about his return and what Paul describes about the catching away, some believe that these are two separate events. Some say that the rapture occurs before the tribulation or pre-trib. Some say it's in the middle of the tribulation or mid-trib. And there are other views as well, including post-trib, after the tribulation. So what seems to call the sequence of events into question, especially for those who hold to a pre-trib rapture, is where Paul indicates that believers will be saved from God's wrath. Specifically, just after Paul describes the catching away in 1 Thessalonians 4, in chapter 5, verse 9, he says this, God did not appoint us to wrath, but to the acquiring of salvation through our Master Yeshua, the Messiah. So the thinking goes that while Paul doesn't actually say tribulation in this context, that wrath here is referring to the tribulation. Therefore, if believers aren't appointed to wrath, but are to be saved from it, then the rapture must be before the tribulation. That's a very oversimplified explanation of what pre-tribulationists believe. So this understanding hangs in large part on definition of terms. At least within pre-trib doctrine, there appears to be a kind of conflation between the tribulation, wrath, and the day of the Lord, depending upon who's teaching it. Because some teachers will make certain dispensational distinctions, while others will basically consider them all the same. As far as I can tell, I think this conflation might come from a misapplication of certain scriptures, one of which being Luke's version of the events of Matthew 24. Luke describes them this way in chapter 21, verses 23 through 28. Alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, people fainting with fear and with foreboding of what is coming on the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. So while there are a lot of differences between this passage in Luke and what appears to be the parallel passage in Matthew 24, I can totally see and understand the harmonization. While Matthew refers to it as a time of great tribulation, Luke calls it a time of great distress and wrath. So assuming that Luke and Matthew are referring to the same event, then obviously the tribulation will also be a time of wrath. So then why is it a misapplication or conflation of terms to insist that the wrath of 1 Thessalonians 5:9 is referring to the tribulation? It's because the wrath being spoken of in 1 Thessalonians is explicitly made in the context of Paul's warning about the day of the Lord, which isn't the same thing as the tribulation. This is the plain reading of 1 Thessalonians 5:9, when we read it in context with the first verse, where Paul says, And concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you yourselves have known thoroughly that the day of Adonai will come in this way, as a thief in the night. But you, brothers, are not in darkness, such that the day would catch you as a thief, because God did not appoint us to wrath, but to the acquiring of salvation through our Master Yeshua, the Messiah. So Paul is very clearly here describing not the tribulation, but the day of Adonai. He says the day of Adonai will come in this way, and says that they will be saved from the wrath that is in that darkness. And this understanding of wrath is also in harmony with the prophecies from Isaiah and Zephaniah that we just read. So just because wrath can also be attributed to the tribulation according to Yeshua, that doesn't automatically exclude it from being attributed to anything else, especially the day of the Lord, which Scripture attributes wrath to explicitly. The only way that I can see to make wrath here and elsewhere be referring to the tribulation is to also say that the tribulation is the same thing as the day of the Lord, which some teachers definitely teach. But despite the abundance of scriptures that describe the day of the Lord with its distinctive features, at minimum, the idea that the tribulation and the day of the Lord are the same directly contradicts the plain sense of Yeshua's teaching, who clearly puts one immediately after the other. So if we aren't conflating terms, then there's no conflict between the idea of believers going through the tribulation, but being saved from God's wrath on the day of Adonai, the time which immediately follows the Great Tribulation, according to Yeshua.